we go. So we're going to open up a new page. We're going to click on the type tool. We're going to click once to get that lorem ipsum prompt. You're going to type a word, go to the black arrow, and hold down shift. Remember, I was talking about how shift is very important, because if you don't hold down shift, you get distortion of the letters. And not to say you would never do this. You might squish it a little bit, but for the most part, you always want to hold down shift when you scale a word up or down. The next thing you would do is go over to your character palette, and you would drop down next to Myriad Pro and choose a font. You're only going to get the character palette option if the typeface is selected. So it's not going to show up over here unless you click on the word, and you can drop down. So we're hovering over these words. We did this really quickly last time, so spend a minute and go through the entire alphabet. Just kind of notice all the different fonts that are there. So we've got kind of a range for you. There's scripty, there's ones with personality, but there's a lot of very basic fonts. And I think a lot of times people feel like basic fonts are boring. But remember, in a lot of times in graphic design, most of the times in graphic design, you want your typeface to be very legible. So those boring fonts are really good because they're legible. And you're going to have that thing happen where you've been staring at a word long enough that it starts to look like it's spelled wrong. Anybody have that happen? Uh-huh. So what I'm going to ask that you land on is a typeface that's fairly simple. There are certainly lots with personality, like Chiller has personality, and these script fonts, like Real Miami, has a lot of personality. But let's land on something that's kind of basic. I'm going to go to Lemon Milk. And we're going to review what to do when you want to modify the font. So you can certainly leave it as it is. That's not like it's not an option. But if you want to play with the word, if you want to make it look a little bit different, if you want to add gradients in it and patterns in it, what you need to do, once you're sure you've spelled it right and you're sure you've got the typeface you want, you right-click and create outlines. What's going to happen is the box, the selection box, is going to look different. It's going to be smaller. And you'll notice if you go to your white arrow, you can see all those anchor points. So just like when we're dealing with rectangles and circles and squares and all that, you can see all those anchor points, which means you can drag with the white arrow over anchor points and modify the letter. You can modify specific anchor points. You can click on an anchor point once, click and drag it to stretch it or change it. So that's with the white arrow. Just like with boxes and circles and things, you can modify the letter. Now if you want to change the size of one of the letters, then you would go to the black arrow. You would click to select the whole word, double click to select one of the letters. So just keep clicking until you see the selection box. Then you can hold down shift and scale the letter up or move it, change where it is in location to the other letters. You have to be careful with that because that's going to change legibility as well. But that allows you to modify. And sometimes just the slightest change is interesting. Like I went already way too much on the Chicago that's going on here. But like tilting one of the letters or stretching one of the letters or making the first letter larger. Sometimes those small things can go a long way. You also, if you go to the white arrow, you can notice that you can select the inside shapes of some letters. So like I can select just the white part of that letter and change what's happening in there. Or I can even just hit delete and delete it. So it's just a solid circle now. course, if you want to draw something, like say you want to put the Willis Tower where this eye is, you just remove it, right? So you would draw something in that space. So it just allows you to mess with the letters that are there. So that's your basic modification of fonts. What I want to show now is some things you can do to add color and style to Typeface. So I'm just going to type a new word. I'll type the same word, I guess. Same way we did before. Hold down Shift to make it larger. So I'm going to show some of these techniques. Adding gradients, all that good stuff. So if you want to follow along, follow along. If you just want to play and experiment, go for it. So I just typed in New Chicago. I'm going to right-click and create outlines. I can, of course, add color to the whole word, right? So I can just click over here in my swatches or my fill and just color a whole word. I can also add a stroke color. So I can make that stroke bigger or smaller. And you guys know this already. You can click on the word stroke over here and go to uniformity and change the thickness of that stroke. So we did that when we were playing with stickers also. So I'm going to make this stroke a white stroke. And then I'm going to Alt drag another Chicago. I'm going to make that one a darker blue, so I've got blue going on, and I'm going to turn off the stroke on that one. And then using the black arrow, I'm going to start to interact it with the other one. Now it doesn't look that interesting right now because it's just the dark blue over top of the light blue. But if I right-click, Arrange, Send to Back, you can see those white strokes like cutting through the letter, or appearing to cut through the letters. So you can play with like stacking. So that's kind of a simple way to make it look a little more interesting. And there's lots of variations of this. You can do multiple layers, a lot of different colors. Actually, the art shirts that we are selling did this with the rainbow. I'll show you guys later in the period, but rainbow stacking of all the letters. I'm going to take the back Chicago. It doesn't really matter which one you do, but let's just do another duplicate. And for this one, I'm going to completely modify it by making the letters look scribbly. So with the word selected, I'm going to go up to the top and go to Effect at the very top. I'm going to go to Stylize. And I'm going to go to Scribble. Now you guys know drop shadows, outer glows, you can use any of those, but we haven't talked about Scribble yet. So Scribble gives you a really big box, and if you hit Preview, you can see the word Scribble. You can play with these spacings to make it more or less legible. It's kind of fussy. But what I'm actually going to show you is how to like make a background scribble. Like this. And then Alt drag another version of Chicago and put it over top. So you get kind of like a fuzzy, floaty cloud background. So you can make that scribble background like really hard to read. So here's my other version. The scribble is like lighter. And I think in that one I actually had stroke on. Let's see what happens. We turn stroke on. Yeah, so you can play with strokes, so it's like 2 layers. Scribble. You click the word and you go to Effect, Stylize Scribble. So then I'm going to play with a gradient inside the word Chicago on that scribble. You don't have to do it on the scribble. If you just want to do it on your own, you can do that too. But if you guys remember, in your swatches, or over here in the fill pop-out with all those swatches, there's some preset gradients. So white to black and yellow to orange and blue to fading into nothing. And you'll notice when you apply those gradients, it applies to each letter, which maybe you like. You also have at the bottom of the stroke panel, once you've selected gradients, this button that says Gradient Options, and then your gradient window comes out. So you can play with the different types of gradients, freeform and radial, and you can flip-flop them. You can play with the colors, all that stuff that we learned in stickers. But what if you want to change the direction of the gradient so it goes all the way through the whole word? That would be this gradient button over here on the left. Do you remember that? It allows you to drag across the word. So you can control the direction the gradient goes. Is that working for everybody? Enough? One more thing I'm going to show you that's kind of fun, if you take another alt drag and just turn it into just a regular color. Up here in Effects, there's this option called 3D. And if you're going to use this, I would say use it subtly, like don't overuse it. It also does eat up a bunch of memory in your computer, so just be aware. It might be slow to process, or it might freeze your computer. But there's this extrude and bevel option that gives you a 3D dialog box that shows you, if you move this box around, how much you're making the word 3D. If you click preview, you can see the word change. So you'll see like the wire grid kind of rendering before the final one's rendered. And there's all kinds of different customizations you can do there. You can make it a wireframe if you want. No shading, plastic shading. So that's a way that you can make it like actually look three-dimensional. That was in Effect 3D. Extrude and bevel. So I'd like you to play. I'm going to give you a good chunk of time to play, thinking about like what word you might put on your geofilter, what font you would do, how you might modify the font, what you would do with different effects. You might want to do a Google search for like cool font effects and just see what's out there. You might not be able to do all of these things, but it might give you some ideas of kind of the aesthetic that you're looking for or ways to change typeface. We're going to do a lot more elaborate, like